Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast. This is a weekly half-hour program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the position of any Grand Lodge, pendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmanOnline.com. We got a 2-for-1 here this week with Right Worshipful Harry Williams and Right Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, brothers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Mike.
Brother Harry is the past master and current senior warden of Warren Lodge number 32. And Brother Rubin, of course, is our grand treasurer and is also affiliate member of Warren Lodge 32. And that's what we're here to talk about. Warren Lodge 32, and what makes it special is it's New York's last moon lodge. And, you know, Brother Williams, as we had mentioned, there is a bit of a noteworthy connection, at least in Brother Rubin's article on the Craftsman Online website, where we can connect Warren Lodge with the American Revolution. Can you take us back to that evening and share some of the history of April 18th, 1775, during Paul Revere's midnight ride to Lexington, Mass., and how that connects with the Masonic Lodge in Rhinebeck, New York?
It connects with actually quite a few lodges. The ride was started not physically, but Dr. Joseph Warren, who at the time was also Grand Master of Massachusetts and was an active in the Sons of Liberty and other things with the Revolutionary War. And he pulled together 3 people to send them to Lexington and Concord, one of which was Paul Revere, who is obviously most famous for it now, in part because of Longfellow's poem. But if you look around the various jurisdictions, you will find there are a lot of Warren Lodges around. There are at least a couple down in Manhattan area. Brother Joseph Warren was honored by having a lot of lodges named after him. And the brothers who established a lodge in Dutchess County did so also, calling it Warren Lodge. At the time, it was the Warren Lodge number 157, and it was hosted in Pine Plains. Probably several years afterwards, it actually moved to what's called Lafayetteville, another famous brother there. And then finally, in the 1860s, Theodore Schultz, he was a brother in the lodge. He was only 24 years of age, but he had tuberculosis, and he passed away. And as part of his bequeath, he bequeathed to both a church in the town, but also to the lodge, property and money to build the lodge building. Now, at that time, there was no benevolent orders in the state, and they required a special law to be passed by the Assembly and the Senate so that the lodge could accept the money and the property. Lodges were not allowed to own property prior to that unless there was a special legislation to do that. And so that happened, and the lodge was built in what's called Schultzville. It's a small hamlet in the middle of Dutchess County. His family, Theodore Schultz, had been there for quite a while. And in fact, I've actually spent some time in the last couple of days researching some of that. And his family comes back having large property holdings from the mid-1700s. So he'd been here a while, and he loved his lodge, even though he had to travel probably about 15 miles to get to lodge normally. But he loved it so much that he left money to build the lodge building. And we built the building in the 1860s. But the lodge itself had been around since 1807.
I spent 5 years living in the Hudson Valley, so I'm very familiar with the Rhinebeck area and the Taconic State Parkway. I lived in Fishkill, Wappingers Falls, and then we eventually had a house on Route 308 near the Dutchess County Fairgrounds in Rhinebeck. One of the things I love about that area is, as you mentioned, well, it's in the hamlet of Schultzville. And if you go to look up Warren Lodge number 32, it will say it's in Schultzville, but then that's also part of Rhinebeck, and they're on Center Road just off the Taconic State Parkway. My question is the lodge building, is it still at the original site, and obviously, but also in the original building, or did things move over?
It is the original building that was built in the 1860s that Theodore Schultz had actually left money for. It is not at the original location. The lodge could not afford the building any longer, and so we actually sold it to the Town of Clinton Historical Society. And with the right that we could use the lodge room itself forever. As long as we exist as a lodge, we could continue to use the lodge room. And so that lasted for another couple of years. And then the Historical Society was having trouble keeping up with the building. And they sold it to the town of Clinton with the same restrictions. And the town basically decided that it would work well. And they had a campus about half a mile north of where our original location was, where they had actually moved other buildings. And so they moved our building down there. And now there's about 4 buildings in this little campus-like atmosphere, of which we are one of them. And we meet there. So it's literally within half mile of where it originally stood.
Brother Rubin took some excellent pictures of the lodge from the outside and the inside. That's on his blog piece at craftsmanonline.com. But Brother Rubin, could you give us a little tour? Could you take us around the lodge and talk about some of the history that's in the building?
I was just really blown away when I was, the first time I stepped into the lodge. I like to think of myself as a pretty well-traveled Mason. And when 2 years ago, I was invited by the then worship master of the lodge, Right Worship Brother Art Pritchard, to come and speak to the lodge. And at that time, he informed me for the first time that what a moon lodge was. And I just was amazed. I'd never even heard of what a moon lodge was, let alone that we have now one remaining moon lodge in the state of New York. And so when I visited this lodge and of course I already knew most of the brothers who are already members, I was just kind of taken aback by the efforts that these good brothers were doing to try to keep history alive, and how sad I thought it was that there were so many wonderful brothers around our state who would champion this special lodge, the last moon lodge in the state of New York, if only they knew about it. It was a magical night when I first went there, and as I've said before, they opened their proceedings by lantern light. And of course, because they're all experienced Master Masons, the ritual was superb, and the brotherly love was warm and inviting, and the building itself is just a charming old building. And even where I'm not familiar with its original site, but actually its current site is just a wonderful location in the woods with other historical buildings nearby. And there's always a big full moon hanging overhead when you arrive to the lodge, and it's special. So as far as some of the other details, I know let Brother Harry talk about those.
I would say that one of the things that impresses a lot of people when they walk into the lodge room is the ceiling. It's a wooden ceiling that's, I have expert woodworkers who have come in and said they have no idea how they did this. I mean, it's a tongue and groove in the shape of a big arc, and it's very, very impressive. One of the brothers says it must have been a shipbuilder who did this just because of the nature of the nature of the ceiling. But other than that, yeah, I mean, we open by lantern light.
Another picture that I saw was the vault.
Yes, the safe.
What's the story behind that? I love old safes in buildings.
It's the lodge is safe. I mean, I have no idea that there's a story behind it, but we actively use it. We no longer have the original charter from 1807, but we have, charters since then that are in there. Our black book is in there. Our other historical items that we care about are in that safe.
What fascinates me when you talk, and we're going to talk about the Moon Lodge experience, but just, I think a lot of people sometimes write off the experience of a Blue Lodge or a Country Lodge. They think a lot of our Masonic history exists in New York City or in Albany or, more of the populated areas of New York State. And here in this beautiful little pocket in the Hudson Valley, just off the Taconic, you're going to find this wonderful experience. And now we can talk about, I think, which makes it truly unique, as Brother Rubin alluded to, which is it is the last Moon Lodge. And for brothers listening that might not be familiar with that, Brother Williams, can you walk us through what a Moon Lodge is and when you meet and how you meet?
Certainly. I mean, a Moon Lodge is like a regular lodge. It's just that when we meet floats throughout the month. It is the specific night that we meet is determined by the full moon. Other moon lodges may be by different phases of the moon, but ours is based on the full moon. And so we meet on the Thursday on or before the full moon each month. And so you have to get your calendar out and look at the phases of the moon and figure out, do we have a meeting this week or is it next week? And but part of that was because if you think back to the early 1800s, there were no paved roads, there were no street lights. There were, you had to get to the lodge, and in order to do that at night, having the full moon added some extra light to you, especially out here in the country where you've got a lot of farms, and to get to the lodge, you've got to be able to see where you're going.
Oh, yeah. Could you just imagine, being a member of that lodge in 1806 and it's degree night and you're like, oh, I'm not going to get home until 9 or 10.
Yeah.
Well, at least I have the light of the moon to get me home because headlights weren't a thing.
Yeah.
And isn't that remarkable? In this day and age, we have brothers who complain about, can't make it to lodge because they have to get in their car with their air conditioning and travel too far. Whereas there were brothers back in the day, because of their commitment to the craft, they either got in their buggy or got on their horse, or many of them, I suppose, probably even just walked long country roads that were not so straight, that were not paved, that were muddy and rutted. And yet they found it important enough to get to their lodge to see their brothers to carry out the work of the day. And so that's pretty special.
Several years ago, I had to go in and read several of the old proceedings. And I was looking through proceedings from the early 1900s, and you had the district deputies then had to do a yearly report to the Grand Master of what they did and everything. And they were published in the proceedings. And so, I remember reading some of these of, I visited all 20 some lodges in the 2 counties that I am responsible for. And I thank you for letting me do that. And by the way, this is my 3rd year of service. And I just can't imagine some of that today. You traveled all over huge amounts of distances on horseback or in a wagon.
Now in 2021, you're pulling up to this lodge. There's this beautiful full moon up in the night sky. You're out in the country, so there's not so many lights kind of distorting that. And your mind is already prepared to go in and do the work of the craft that night, whether it's, a degree night. I think that would be beautiful to go for a degree night, or even a business meeting. There's something special about it. And what makes this Moon Lodge special for us here in New York State, as we mentioned, it's the last one we have. There's roughly about 129 Moon Lodges left in America. 14 are in Pennsylvania. Texas has the most Moon Lodges that are active with 19, and Warren Lodge number 32 is the last here in New York State. Outside of the moon calendar, do you still meet in the typical New York calendar from September to about June?
Typically, though, one of the times we sometimes don't meet is we before we moved, we never met in January and February, because one of the things we couldn't afford in the old location for under ours was heat. And so we had no heat in the building. And so you tended to not meet when it was cold out. But typically, we'll meet the typical New York calendar in terms of September through May or June. Actually, it's usually June, because that's where we quite often will have our Strawberry Shortcake Festival and do our installation of officers. So,
okay, so we got to plan a June meeting, Steve.
Absolutely.
To get up there. All right, so let's talk about the experience. You mentioned there's a full moon. Brothers are coming to the lodge. You meet by lantern. Take me through the ritual before the ritual of opening and closing the lodge.
Basically, we will light our lanterns, very much like you would light the lesser lights during the opening of lodge. But these are oil lanterns for the most part. We have a couple of electrics just as a backup. Everybody typically buys and brings their own, though we do have a few extras for visitors and such. Once the lights are going on with the lanterns, we'll turn out the electrical lights. And so, other than what the lanterns are providing, there is no light in the lodge room.
And if I would just add that, it was absolutely magical. It was special. There's a reason why, for example, we hoodwink our candidates and our brothers going through degrees, because you can really experience the ritual, the words, in the dark with your eyes shut. So this is something that for us Master Masons to be able to just appreciate the words of the opening and the twinkling of the lights. And as I said, I really had never experienced it anyplace else. And one thing that really drove me to try to want to actually affiliate with the lodge, which is what I did do, was just because we have so many magical places like Warren Lodge around our state, and I think that it's sad that we've been losing too many buildings to neglect, to not enough brothers raising the battle cry and to save them. And so while I think that there are wonderful lodges all over the state, and I've had the pleasure of traveling to many of them, Warren Lodge was something that I thought I could join and do whatever I could to help brothers like Brother Harry and all the wonderful brothers of Warren Lodge just get the word out. I've met so many wonderful young brothers around our state who I know they get in their cars and they drive to other locations, other states for special degrees that they hear about advertised. And yet they did not even know that New York State has Warren Lodge in its backyard. And I know that there's so many younger brothers that are just so excited to hear about Warren Lodge's existence. And I know that we're all looking forward to the pandemic completely being done and having a special gathering there sometime in the not too distant future.
So let's talk about the opportunity that there is for brothers listening who are like, this is wonderful. I'd love to visit Warren Lodge. Is there any way for me to support it? Unfortunately, great institutions like Warren Lodge that have withstood the test of time, even in little communities like Rhinebeck or Schultzville, you see the influx, the population changes, and Masonry right now, the membership is contracting a bit, and lodges, as Brother Rubin had identified, are going through some difficult times. What I found unique is that you had this opportunity for brothers like me that were in the Albany area to support the lodge and get some kind of cool history out of this. Tell us about the Midnight Rider subscription and how easy it is for brothers to support your lodge.
We went through a number of different alternatives that we were looking at as attracting brothers. I mean, there's always the ability for any brother that would like to affiliate, just like Brother Rubin did. But we were looking for something that was a little less onerous. And I mean, not to speak bad of Grand Lodge, but Grand Lodge gets an extra cut of that when they do that. And so we were looking at what is a better way of doing that. And so we did and I'm saying this to the treasurer.
I'm coming for you, Brother Harry.
Yeah. but that's, for people like Michael here, who's talking about trying to help support, that's not what he's looking for. And so we looked at a number of alternatives. The one we decided to do is have a subscription service where we're going to do some sort of newsletter, and we give a pin to the person that subscribes to it. That's basically looks like Paul Revere on a horse. And we went through a couple of different options for names, and we decided to go with the Midnight Riders to tie that into the Paul Revere and Joseph Warren legacy. And we looked at a couple different options on that, and for $32 a year you can join the Midnight Riders, support the lodge, get the newsletter, get the pin, and we're also talking about having potentially an outdoor table lodge at some point in the future. So we want to encourage things. It's one of the things that we did here many years ago in Dutchess County was we actually visited a lot of the other lodges with lanterns to show them what was going on. And that actually helped to increase our membership. But we're looking at potentially taking some of this other places, like, and these are just ideas we're banting about. Could we do a lantern night up at Utica during St. John's weekend or something? These are all ideas we're banting about, basically to spread our reach and to try to reach out to other brothers and show them what we've got here.
What's the requirement to be a Midnight Rider subscriber?
Send us $32.
So it doesn't matter if you're a master Mason, if you're the wife or a partner of a Mason.
Nope.
You could do it in honor or memory of a brother or a loved one.
Absolutely. And we'll send you the pin in the newsletter.
And for those who are curious why $32, it's because it's Warren Lodge number 32. So that's $32.
When Steve shared this article, and I was really moved by it, and I'm with you, Brother Williams. It saddens me when I hear of some of our, and I'm sure Brother Rubin is in the same places, when you hear of some of our historical buildings in New York State that just can't continue to keep their doors open. And we've done a series of Masonic talks, and we've heard brothers and the strife that comes with this. And as Masons, it's the one thing that we don't want to lose. We have such an attachment to our temples and our buildings. And when I heard that for $32, which I was sitting here while you were describing $32, I'm like, what's that? That's like the cost of a dress shirt. Maybe it's a pizza for dinner one night. It was, I would have gladly spent $132 is the point to help keep this alive, because this is something that is really special about Freemasonry. And I love the fact that you've opened up the subscriber, and the biggest reward for me was coming home and getting this wonderful, you don't get them anymore, letter that was written to me, that was signed with the pen, and a nice certificate. Like I really felt like I had done something, and I had really contributed in a larger way. And unfortunately, I moved out of the area, but if I'm ever in the Albany, or actually in the Hudson Valley area, and literally the planets align perfectly for me to get there for a meeting, I'm going to come knocking at the door, because I want to see what this experience is like.
Actually, it's not the planets. This is the moon that's important.
Okay. Whew, good. That's a big hurdle. I was kind of worried about that. So we've talked about this, and I'm sure there's guys that are like, just tell us how to do this already. Where do we go? If you're listening to this podcast, we reach brothers here in New York State, but then, all across the country and literally around the world through the internet. How do they support you? How do they become a Midnight Rider?
If you look at the Warren 32 Facebook page, you'll see there's details there on how to become a Midnight Rider.
And it's really easy to find it because, while it is Warren Lodge number 32, there's not going to be too many pictures of lodges in New York State with lanterns and the full moon in the backdrop. And that's going to steer you right there and connect with the brothers. And 2 or 3 weeks, you get it's all processed, and you're not doing it for the pen and the certificate. You're doing it really to support New York State Masonic history and have a special place in the lodge. Now, this does come, it's not an affiliation as a membership, so you can't vote. You wouldn't be recognized as a member of the lodge, but definitely you'd be received as a supporter and a subscriber of the lodge, and really helping to preserve this unique piece of history.
Of course, I hope that everyone listening to this podcast will not only go to, learn about Moon Lodges, but certainly go to the Warren Lodge number 32 Facebook page. But they also send just an email directly to the lodge secretary, and his email address is masonjim3652@gmail.com. That's Mason, MASON, Jim, JIM, 3652@gmail.com. Brother Jim, who's the secretary of the lodge, will send all the information about how to become a Midnight Rider and a supporter of New York Masonic history.
We'll make sure to get that information in the show links for this podcast as well.
If I just may say something, and actually, I think Brother Harry probably would know more about the daily activities of the lodge, but I made it a big promise to everyone that once the pandemic was done, that I was going to make sure that the brothers of Warren Lodge number 32 did an outdoor festive board, under a full moon with lantern lights. So obviously, God, thank goodness, things are opening up. We're not quite there yet. We've not planned anything yet, but everyone should stay tuned because I promise that the next opportunity, you're going to start to see some advertisements for a wonderful festive board. And I just really hope that all of the brothers from around New York State and beyond will travel down to this special little corner of New York Freemasonry and experience the last Moon Lodge in the state of New York, Warren Lodge number 32.
Definitely. And every time I look up at a full moon and notice it, I'm going to think, somewhere in a little pocket of upstate New York, there's brothers getting together and keeping that craft alive. And that's just beautiful. This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. I want to thank my guests this week for joining us, Right Worshipful Harry Williams and Stephen Adam Rubin. Brothers, thank you much for coming on.
Thank you, Brother Mike.
Thank you.
If Masonic education is important to you, you can sign up for our email newsletter at craftsmanonline.com. New episodes of the Craftsman Online Podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.